The ROG Ally was one of the first mainstream Windows handhelds. When it launched, it was nothing short of a mess with unoptimized drivers and buggy software, but slowly, over time, it became one of the top tier choices for a gaming handheld available, with a large number of people even preferring it over the Steam Deck, arguably the most popular handheld on the market. But has the ROG Ally aged like wine, or has it spoiled like milk? Let's find out in today's video. Outside of some more niche handhelds, the ROG Ally at the time of release really only had the Steam Deck to compete with. Fast forward to today, and we now have a market filled to the brim with new handhelds and new ones still being announced and released quarterly. However, the main competition for ASUS is mostly narrowed down to a few different companies, those being options from Lenovo, MSI, and Valve. Of the main competing handhelds in today's market, the ROG Ally is the lightest. This is a good thing because it means you can play with it the longest with the least amount of fatigue. However, at the same time, its weight also makes it feel less like a premium device, and it becomes abundantly clear that this lack of weight is due to the size of the battery, which we'll discuss a bit more later. But the Ally also sacrifices its ergonomics for its weight as well. It's a very flat device. It's not unbearable to hold, but it is probably the worst of all of its competitors when it comes to ergonomics. Many things were sacrificed for this portable handheld to be, well, more portable. Again, I can't label its lighter weight as a bad thing completely, but if you are watching this and are trying to decide if one of these is worth getting, consider weighing the pros and cons that come with such a lightweight device. No pun intended. But of course, there's more to the physical aspects of the Ally other than weight and ergonomics alone. The Ally's face buttons are a bit bigger than most. They're not the best nor the worst I've seen, but they're acceptable. I wish they were a tiny bit more responsive. This is just a nitpick, but I like the buttons on the Legion Go, for example, a bit better. There are also two mappable buttons located on the backside of the handheld as well, which your mileage may vary on how useful these are to you, as I know a lot of my viewers actually don't like. And the triggers and bumpers on the ROG Ally are okay. Not the best nor the worst. The joysticks, on the other hand, I very much dislike. They're very loose and are not Hall effect, which means that they will eventually need to be replaced at some point. Not ideal for less tech-savvy folk who won't want to open up their handheld. The competition is well ahead of ASUS in this regard, as most of the other handhelds on the market have opted for Hall effect joysticks. Although, on a more positive note, the speakers on the Ally have aged incredibly well. They are still some of, if not even the best speakers available on a handheld. They're even better than the ROG Ally X's speaker, which is supposed to be its much more refined, more expensive sibling. Just listen to how loud and full the sound is.
Under the lake. And after all this time, you've managed to get out.
Yeah.
But so has your evil doppelganger. Mr. Scratch? Or is it the dark presence?
Both. It's interchangeable. He's Scratch when he looks like me, but he can change into this.
Next up, let's discuss the ROG Ally's display. The ROG Ally has a 1080p 120Hz VRR display with a peak brightness level of 500 nits. In my opinion, this display set the standard for gaming handhelds at the time. It was far better than the Steam Deck's 800p 60Hz display. However, now a lot of the competition use the same display or better. But I still think the ROG Ally's display holds up super well. Why, you may ask? Well, the Z1 Extreme is not capable of much more than 1080p 120 FPS in today's games, and will be less likely to be capable of more as time passes due to games becoming so much more difficult to run. Having VRR, however, allows games to run at a fluctuating frame rate without it looking too choppy, as VRR or variable refresh rate smooths out frame drops. You can also, on rare occasions, take full advantage of the panel with older games, indie games, and emulation. So I still believe this is the perfect resolution and refresh rate for a handheld of this specification. Of course, I'd much rather it be an OLED display or just a brighter screen in general, but I firmly am of the stance that the display on the ROG Ally has held up excellently. The custom software on the ROG Ally is called Armoury Crate SE. Armoury Crate SE is a streamlined version of Armoury Crate designed specifically for the ROG Ally. It streamlines driver updates, RGB settings, fan curve settings, and more. Armoury Crate SE is good software in my opinion, especially after its various updates over the years, which, by the way, ASUS has been the best when it comes to updates and driver updates compared to its other Windows competitors. However, they are still lagging a bit behind, as we will discuss later in the gaming section. Other companies, however, have lagged further further behind ASUS when it comes to updates due to the Z1 Extreme requiring unique driver updates compared to the generic AMD 7840U, which is what the Z1 Extreme is based on. And of course, the Ally is still a Windows handheld, so it runs Windows. I'm not going to state an opinion on this because it's not a comparison video of SteamOS versus Windows. People are allowed to prefer one over the other, or just load Bazai on here or wait for the official release of SteamOS for Windows handhelds if you want the best of both worlds. Finally, let's answer the big question. Can the ROG Ally still reliably play today's games in the year of 2025? In this section, I will play a couple of games that have recently been released for PC in 2025. Why only 2025? Well, that is what this video is about, right? Gaming on the Ally in 2025. If you'd like to see more of my experience of older games and emulation, go check out my previous review on the ROG Ally here after you're done watching this one. So the two games that I've chosen for today's video are Assassin's Creed Shadows and Spider-Man 2. Both of these games are very recent releases at the time of this video. I was also going to show Monster Hunter Wilds as well, but I don't think it runs well enough on anything right now. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, I originally did plan on testing Monster Hunter on the Ally, but unfortunately, I don't have space for it on the SSD. So let's start with the latest release from Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed Shadows. Assassin's Creed Shadows is running at the lowest settings with FSR 3.1 set to balanced at 1080p. You can adjust the resolution accordingly based on what performance profile you choose, but we are using a 25-watt profile here. The performance here is slightly below 30 FPS in the open world and can sometimes dip even further. This game is playable to an extent if you drop the resolution and enable upscaling, but the Ally definitely is struggling to hold its own here even when plugged in. Using the 15-watt mode, the game is only playable at 720p with upscaling and FSR frame gen enabled. Not a promising sign for things to come for this device. Of course, this could be an optimization issue with Ubisoft and whatnot, but the game runs fine on the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus that I recently reviewed at 1080p with XeSS balance mode enabled. While frame gen is available on Assassin's Creed Shadows, I don't recommend using it at low frame rates because it can look and act janky, and it also adds latency, of course. Lowering the resolution and adding frame gen along with adding upscaling techniques may make the game playable, but it also looks like a hot mess. From my experience, the most playable way to play Assassin's Creed Shadows is at 900p and balanced mode FSR while using the 25-watt performance mode. This was, in my experience, the best way to get above 30 FPS without it looking completely like an oil painting. However, your mileage still may vary depending on how intense the scene is or the time of day or what location you're at on the map, since it is a wide open world and city areas will still drop the frame rate. So Assassin's Creed Shadows is playable on the Ally, but with many compromises. In Spider-Man 2, I was actually a little surprised at the performance of the Ally following my review of the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus. This is because, once again, a new game that recently came out ran nearly flawlessly on the 8 AI Plus at 1080p with balanced upscaling sitting around or above 30 FPS, while on the Ally, Spider-Man 2 with the lowest settings at 1080p with balanced FSR enabled was around 30 FPS most of the time, but often dipped below, even into the teens randomly while swinging around the city. But I'm not here to do a comparison video here today between both of these devices, despite me mentioning the 8 AI Plus multiple times now. I just want you all to know where my standards were when writing this section, coming fresh off the heels of my review of the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus. Dropping the resolution to either 900p or 720p with FSR 3.1 balanced upscaling enabled made the game much more playable. Just wasn't nearly as good looking. However, when in the 15-watt mode profile, I was able to play the game at a playable frame rate at these lower resolutions. So the gaming experience with Spider-Man 2 was not the worst, but it was becoming very apparent it was testing the limits of the Z1 Extreme. The Ally's official drivers were also not up to date for this game, which surprised me because Spider-Man 2 has been out for a while now and had required me to sideload the latest drivers. But let me be clear, the game is still more than playable on the Ally, just don't expect the best visual fidelity and consistent frame rate while swinging around. But both of these games point out a major flaw with the ROG Ally. The updates for the drivers come out for the 7840U, which is what the Z1 Extreme is based on, but it's still up to ASUS to implement the specific update for the handheld itself, which in this case forced me to download the drivers directly from AMD to get the best performance. Sort of frustrating, but of course that is not exclusively an issue with the ROG Ally. So you might be thinking, it's not fair to be testing the Ally with games if the drivers for them haven't been officially released for the handheld. Well, actually, in the context of this video, I think it is very fair because it exposes a glaring flaw with the handheld going into the future. This is the experience that the user would have if they got this device today to play new games, and this is something the average consumer should be made aware of, especially going forward into the future, which is what this video is about. It is a huge annoyance to not have driver updates ready in a timely manner. 2 months have gone by without an official ROG Ally driver update, which is absurd. In that 2-month span, a decent amount of new games have come out, but even with the latest AMD drivers, both of these 2025 games are nearing the bare minimum of playability on the ROG Ally in my opinion. Yes, you could always drop the resolution to a lower level and use upscaling techniques, but dear God, is it ugly. But of course, to each their own. So in summary, the ROG Ally is still able to play games that were releasing in 2025, but for the first time I have reviewed it, its age is starting to show. In these two games, I've had to compromise quite a bit of visual fidelity to get them to run at 30 FPS, which is the bare minimum of playability for most people. But the Ally is still capable of playing new games in 2025 nonetheless. Just a reminder, however, there are many things that I love about the ROG Ally that I've discussed earlier in this video. With that said, however, there's clearly a big reason the ROG Ally is regularly found so cheap these days, and that is because it is in fact a very flawed Gen 1 handheld, with the most well-known flaw being its micro SD card slot. The micro SD slot on the Ally is well renowned for failing. It was widely reported at the time that the slot for the SD card would just suddenly stop working. Originally, it was thought to be overheating. This was actually proven not to be the case, as Asus revealed eventually that it was a design flaw with power delivery to the SD card slot. Asus has since extended its warranty on the SD card slot. However, this is still an inconvenience for anyone who is suffering from this issue. But to be honest, if you are bold enough to open up the ROG Ally, this shouldn't be a major issue for you, because you should be addressing this other major flaw, its lack of storage. The vanilla ROG Ally Z1 Extreme only comes in a 512GB storage option. This is far too little in my opinion, and I would almost always recommend getting an SSD upgrade if you were planning to get an Ally. So let's say neither of those issues bother you. Well, there's still the battery. The ROG Ally has the worst battery life of its competition. This is hugely important since the device's main purpose is to game on the go, unless you are just chilling on the couch most of the time, in which case you could always plug it in, or of course, buy a portable battery. But if you're feeling bold, you could swap the battery out and 3D print yourself a custom shell to fit it, or just use the JSOC's battery upgrade kit. But all these things either require your effort to resolve or require money. The battery on the Ally holds it back from being a top performer in my opinion, because yes, it does have a high-end chip inside, but what is the point of it if you can't squeeze the extra power out of it like its big brother, the Ally X, can? Asus has even capped the wattage to 25 watts in performance profile on the go. Of course, you should realistically play at 15 watts on the go and lower your game's graphics settings, but that is another compromise. The Ally's 16GB of RAM will also eventually be challenged to an extent where certain games will not run well on the Ally at all. The day will likely come sooner rather than later, as games demand more and more VRAM. So these are all things you have to price in when you see the ROG Ally on sale for so cheap. SSD upgrade, portable battery, and even a case. But not everyone needs these things. If you want a handheld that can punch well above its weight class, the ROG Ally is the perfect handheld for you. The pricing has never been better, but its flaws still need to be weighed into consideration. Conversely, I think the Ally is still the best value handheld at the moment. If you can find one open box or under $600 on sale, I think it's a no-brainer. That is, if you prefer Windows as your operating system. The Steam Deck is also a very compelling offering here as well. Something to keep in mind. And yes, you can load Bazite onto the Ally or even the official port of SteamOS when it's released, but most casual gamers, however, do not want to go through the process of setting these things up. But the value for the Ally for Windows handhelds is still bar none. But the very last thing I want to discuss here today is the long-term future of the ROG Ally, and I personally believe the Ally will still be able to play all your games for the near future. However, with many compromises. Naturally, I think it will become increasingly difficult for it to run new games as time passes, and we have seen evidence of this in today's video. This is the first time I reviewed the Ally that it's starting to show its age. As time passes, its flaws like its lack of storage, smaller battery, 16GB of RAM, and lack of universal eGPU support will become more apparent. So lower resolutions and lower settings will likely be the Ally's future until it becomes a machine that people buy to play emulators or older games exclusively. So is the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme worth getting in 2025? Yes, but only if the price is right for you and if you're okay with the compromises that come with it. But if you have a bit more to spend and or are patient, wait for the Z2 Extreme handhelds to launch. But if you want something right now and the price is right, I don't think you will be completely dissatisfied with the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme in the near-term future. That's going to do it for today's video. If you found this video informative, leave a like and subscribe for more handheld reviews and tech-related videos. Also, you might as well hit that little bell to be the first to know when my next video comes out. This has been Killer Cam. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Peace.